I thought my son Derek was just having a bad day when he started yelling at me during Christmas dinner. But when he stood up in front of 22 guests, pointed his finger at my face, and screamed, "Pay the rent or disappear!" I knew this was planned. My daughter-in-law Angela smirked from across the table, her voice dripping with venom as she added, "Let's see how you survive without us." The dining room fell silent. 22 faces stared at me, some shocked, others embarrassed. My hands trembled as I set down my fork, but my voice was steady when I looked directly at Derek and said, "Would you like me to tell everyone here why you really murdered your father?" His face went white as fresh snow. 18 months before that terrible Christmas, my world collapsed when my husband Frank clutched his chest and fell to the kitchen floor. The paramedics worked on him for 37 minutes, but his heart had simply stopped. At 68, Frank was gone, leaving me alone in our Victorian home on Maple Street in Portland, Oregon. The house felt enormous without his laugh echoing through the halls. Derek arrived at the funeral with his family in tow. His wife Angela wore designer sunglasses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, while their twin daughters Madison and Paige fidgeted in matching black dresses. During the service, Derek kept checking his phone, and I caught Angela rolling her eyes when the pastor spoke about Frank's dedication to family. "Mom, you can't stay in this big house alone," Derek announced 3 days after we buried his father. "Angela and I have decided to move in and help you manage everything." He said it like he was doing me a favor, but something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Within a week, their belongings filled every spare room. Derek's construction tools scattered across Frank's workshop. Angela's expensive clothes crowded my closet, and the twins claimed the basement as their private domain. I found myself cooking for 5 people instead of one, doing laundry for an entire family, and somehow always running out of groceries despite buying twice as much. "Marcy, we need to talk about finances," Angela said one morning over coffee. She spread papers across my kitchen table like a general planning a battle. "Derek's business is expanding and we need capital. The girls' tuition at Sacred Heart Academy is due, and frankly, this house is worth a fortune. You should consider signing it over to Derek. You're getting older and managing property is such a burden." I stared at her perfectly manicured nails drumming against my table. Sacred Heart Academy cost $12,000 per year per child. Derek's construction business, Rodriguez and Patterson Building, had been struggling for months. I'd been quietly covering their shortfalls, paying for groceries, utilities, and even Angela's monthly shopping trips that averaged $800. My neighbor Helen Patterson knocked on my door that afternoon. At 58, Helen was a widow herself, and her sharp gray eyes missed nothing. "Marcy, I hate to pry, but I've noticed some unusual activity around your house. Lots of coming and going at strange hours. Is everything all right?" I invited her in for tea, grateful for friendly conversation. Helen had been a private investigator before retirement, and her questions were gentle but probing. "How are you managing financially?" Sometimes family can be overwhelming when they're dealing with their own problems. "Derek keeps saying Frank left everything to him," I admitted. "But Frank's will is locked in our lawyer's safe. I haven't had the courage to read it yet." Helen's expression grew serious. "Marcy, you need to know what that will says. And you need to know soon." That evening, I overheard Derek on the phone in Frank's old study. "Tommy, I don't care what the clients are saying. We'll get the money. Mom's sitting on a gold mine and she doesn't even know it. Once I get power of attorney, we can liquidate everything." Tommy Rodriguez was Derek's business partner, a decent man who'd worked construction for 20 years. Something about Derek's tone made me press my ear closer to the door. "The nursing home applications are already filled out," Derek continued. "Angela found this place called Sunset Manor. They'll take her after Christmas. Once she's declared incompetent, I can handle all her affairs legally. My blood turned to ice water. I crept back to my room, but sleep was impossible. The next morning, I found Derek using Frank's old checkbook to pay for materials. When I questioned him, he brushed me off. Mom-Dad gave me access to these accounts months ago. Don't you remember? But I did remember. Frank had never given anyone access to our accounts except me. 2 days later, our family lawyer James Buchanan called. At 72, James had been Frank's friend since Vietnam, and his voice carried worry. "Marcy, I need to see you immediately. Derek contacted my office claiming you're experiencing memory problems, and he needs power of attorney. This is highly unusual." I met James at his downtown office, my hands shaking as I signed papers to access Frank's safe deposit box. Inside, along with important documents, I found a letter in Frank's handwriting dated just weeks before his death. "Marcy." The letter read, "If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I've been watching Derek's behavior and I'm concerned. All our assets are in your name only. Derek is not mentioned in my will except for my tool collection. Protect yourself, my love. Trust your instincts." James handed me Frank's actual will. Everything went to me: the house, the savings accounts, the life insurance, even Frank's military pension benefits. Derek would inherit nothing except Frank's workshop tools and truck. "Marcy, there's something else," James said grimly. "Derek attempted to file papers claiming you have dementia. He brought medical documentation from a doctor I've never heard of, Dr. Samuel Hayes. Have you seen this man?" I had never heard of Dr. Hayes in my life. That night, I confronted Derek about the checkbook. He exploded with rage, screaming that I was losing my mind and becoming paranoid. Angela joined in, her voice shrill with accusation. "You're exactly like my grandmother before we had to put her away. This is what happens when old people live alone too long." The twins watched from the stairway, their 12-year-old faces confused and frightened. Madison whispered to her sister, "Why is Daddy yelling at Grandma Marcy?" As I lay in bed that night, pieces of a horrible puzzle began forming in my mind. But the most terrifying piece came when I found Derek's hidden phone while looking for my missing medication bottles. The text messages I discovered made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped the device. Derek to Angela. "Christmas dinner is perfect timing. 22 witnesses to see her break down when we demand rent. Doc Hayes says the commitment papers will be ready by December 26th. Angela to Derek. I've been filming her confused episodes all week. The sleeping pills in her coffee are working perfectly. She'll seem completely unstable by Christmas. Derek to Angela. Once she signs those house papers during Christmas dinner, we file for incompetency the next day. By New Year, she'll be locked up and we'll have everything." I realized with crystal clarity that my son and his wife were planning to destroy me completely, but they had made one crucial mistake. They thought I was helpless. I wasn't helpless at all. 2 weeks before Christmas, I discovered just how deep their betrayal ran. I was supposed to be napping, but instead, I pressed my ear against Derek's bedroom door and listened to him sweet-talking someone on the phone. "Dr. Hayes, I need that psychiatric evaluation completed before Christmas. Yes, she's definitely showing signs of severe dementia. Paranoid episodes, financial confusion, the whole package. My wife has been documenting everything on video." My stomach lurched. Angela had been following me around the house with her phone, claiming she was making memories. In reality, she'd been creating evidence of my supposed mental decline. "The insurance payout will be substantial once she's institutionalized," Derek continued. "We're talking about a woman who's accumulated significant assets over 43 years of marriage. The house alone is worth over $1 million in this market." I crept to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, I looked at a woman who'd spent 18 months believing her son loved her. How could I have been so blind? That afternoon, Angela emerged from the kitchen with my daily coffee, the same helpful smile she'd worn for months. "Here you go, Marcy. Extra cream just how you like it." I accepted the mug with steady hands, but this time I watched her carefully. As she turned away, I saw her slip something into her pocket. When she left for her hair appointment, I searched her purse and found a bottle of crushed sleeping pills wrapped in tissue paper. For months, Angela had been drugging me, then filming my confused, drowsy behavior as proof of mental deterioration. The next morning brought a visit from Tommy Rodriguez. Derek's business partner looked uncomfortable as he shuffled on my front porch, his work boots caked with dried concrete. "Mrs. Patterson, I hate to bother you, but I need to talk to someone about Derek. He's been using company funds for personal expenses, and our clients are threatening to sue. We owe $50,000 on jobs we took deposits for but never completed." I invited Tommy inside, and the whole story spilled out. Derek had been forging my name on loan applications, using my house as collateral without my knowledge. He'd convinced 3 different banks that I'd agreed to secure his business debts. "There's something else," Tommy said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Derek owes money to some dangerous people. A loan shark named Vincent Castellano has been calling the office, making threats. Derek told him the house would cover everything by January." My hands clenched in my lap. Derek wasn't just planning to steal my home, he'd already promised it to criminals. That evening, James Buchanan called with more disturbing news. "Marcy, Derek attempted to file emergency power of attorney papers yesterday. He claimed you'd been wandering the neighborhood confused and had forgotten your own address. Fortunately, I was able to block the filing, but he's getting desperate. James, I need you to do something for me," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I want you to investigate Dr. Samuel Hayes. Something about this man feels wrong." James called back within 2 hours. "Marcy, Dr. Hayes lost his license in California for insurance fraud. He's been practicing illegally in Oregon for 6 months. Whatever documents he's creating are worthless, but that doesn't mean Derek won't try to use them." The next week, Angela's behavior escalated dramatically. She began hiding my medications, moving furniture to create tripping hazards, and documenting every stumble with her phone camera. When I asked about my blood pressure pills, she responded with theatrical concern. "Oh, Marcy, you took them this morning. Don't you remember? This is exactly what I've been worried about. Your memory is getting so much worse." But I hadn't taken anything. Angela was gaslighting me while building a video library of my supposed confusion. The breaking point came when I discovered Angela rummaging through Frank's personal papers in his study. She jumped when she saw me but quickly composed herself. "I'm just organizing things for you, Marcy. All these old documents are so confusing. Derek thinks we should simplify your life." Among the scattered papers, I noticed Frank's military medals were missing. When I mentioned this to Derek, he became defensive and angry. "Mom, you're imagining things again. Dad's medals are probably misplaced. You've been moving things around and forgetting where you put them." But Frank's medals had been in the same shadow box for 20 years. Someone had deliberately taken them. That night I heard Angela on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low but excited. "Samuel, everything's going perfectly. She's so confused she can't even track her own medications. The Christmas dinner plan will work beautifully. 22 witnesses will see her mental breakdown, and then you can process the commitment papers immediately." My heart nearly stopped. Angela was talking to Dr. Hayes with the intimacy of someone far more than a professional acquaintance. Their relationship was personal. "Once she's locked away and Derek has control of her assets, we can finally be together properly," Angela continued. "I'm so tired of pretending to be the devoted daughter-in-law. After New Year, Derek will be rich and single." Single. What did she mean by single? The horrible truth crashed over me like a freezing wave. Angela wasn't just planning to steal my money and have me committed. She was planning to leave Derek once she'd helped him acquire my wealth. But that still didn't explain her comment about Derek being single, unless Derek was planning something even more sinister than commitment. I spent the rest of that week pretending to be increasingly confused while secretly documenting everything. I found the guest list Angela had carefully created for Christmas dinner. 22 people, including neighbors, distant relatives, and Derek's business associates, all chosen specifically to witness my public humiliation and apparent mental breakdown. But Angela had made a critical error in her planning. She'd invited Helen Patterson not knowing that Helen was a retired private investigator with a keen eye for deception. 3 days before Christmas, I made a discovery that changed everything. While searching for my missing medication bottles, I found Frank's secret safe behind his framed military photo. Inside, along with backup copies of important documents, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Medical records showing Frank had been systematically poisoned with digitalis over several months before his death. His heart attack hadn't been natural at all. Angela had murdered my husband. 3 nights before Christmas, I made the most terrifying discovery of my life. I'd been pretending to take the sleeping pills Angela crushed into my evening tea, palming them instead, and hiding them under my tongue until I could spit them out. That night, while Angela and Derek believed I was unconscious, I crept through my own house like a spy. Light spilled from under Frank's study door, accompanied by the sound of champagne glasses clinking. I pressed my ear to the keyhole and heard Derek's voice slurred with alcohol and victory. "To the stupidest woman in Portland," he toasted. "Mom actually thinks we care about her. After Christmas dinner, she'll be committed and we'll be rich." Angela's laugh was like ice cracking. "Your mother has been easier to manipulate than I ever imagined. The digitalis worked perfectly on Frank, and the sleeping pills have kept her confused enough to sign whatever we put in front of her." My legs nearly gave out. Angela had just confessed to murdering Frank with digitalis, a poison derived from foxglove plants, the same plants that grew in abundant clusters throughout our backyard garden. I fumbled with my phone, activating the voice recorder app Helen had taught me to use. Everything they said would be documented. "Samuel is getting impatient," Angela continued. "He wants me to leave Derek immediately after we get control of the assets. Honestly, I can't wait to be done with this charade. Living with your pathetic son for 2 years has been nauseating." Derek's voice turned bitter. "You're using me exactly like you used my father, but I don't care anymore. Once Mom's locked up, I'll take my half of the money and disappear. You can have Dr. Hayes and his medical fraud schemes." "Half?" Angela's voice grew dangerous. "Derek, darling, you're not getting half of anything. Samuel and I have been planning this much longer than you realize. Once your mother signs those power of attorney papers tomorrow during Christmas dinner, you become unnecessary." I heard Derek's chair scrape against the floor. "What do you mean unnecessary?" "I mean accidents happen to people who know too much about murder," Angela replied smoothly. "Your father thought he was so smart, keeping detailed records of his symptoms. He never suspected his loving daughter-in-law was slowly killing him with heart medication from her nursing job." Derek's voice cracked with realization. "You're planning to kill me too." "Eventually. But first you're going to help me get your mother committed. Tomorrow's performance has to be perfect. 22 witnesses will see her complete mental breakdown when you demand rent payment. I'll have it all on video. Then when she's safely locked away and can't contest anything, unfortunate accidents might befall certain people who could complicate our plans. I was recording a confession to 3 murders, Frank's completed assassination, and planned killings of both Derek and myself." Derek's voice turned to whimpering. "Angela, we can work something out. I'll take a smaller share, just don't hurt me. Oh, Derek, Angela purred. You're exactly like your father. Weak, trusting, and ultimately disposable. The only difference is your mother will watch you die before she follows. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone, but I kept recording. I needed every word as evidence. The beauty of digitalis, Angela continued, is that it mimics natural heart failure perfectly. Frank's doctors never suspected anything because I'm a registered nurse. I had legitimate access to cardiac medications, and I knew exactly how much to administer over time. Derek was crying now. Why did you marry me if you were planning this? Because you were stupid enough to give me access to your family's wealth without asking questions. Your father was harder to manipulate, but you've been wonderfully naive. Did you really think a woman like me would genuinely love a failure like you? I heard footsteps moving toward the door and quickly crept back to my room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. But I had everything I needed: recorded confessions to murder conspiracy and planned future killings. The next morning, Angela presented me with official-looking documents during breakfast. Marcy, these are just some papers to simplify your finances. Derek's lawyer says signing them will protect you from taxes. I pretended to read through the power of attorney transfer documents with confused eyes. These seem complicated, dear. Maybe I should wait until after Christmas to think about them. Angela's smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. Actually, Marcy, it would be much better to sign them during Christmas dinner tomorrow, in front of everyone. That way there are plenty of witnesses that you made these decisions voluntarily. Voluntarily, while drugged, confused, and intimidated into compliance. That afternoon, I made a crucial discovery in Frank's secret safe that I'd missed during my first search. Hidden beneath insurance papers were Frank's private medical journals documenting months of mysterious symptoms that had preceded his death. Nausea, irregular heartbeat, confusion, and fatigue that appeared gradually and worsened over time. Symptoms perfectly consistent with chronic digitalis poisoning. But Frank had been smarter than Angela realized. He'd kept detailed records because he suspected something was wrong. On the final pages, written in shaky handwriting just days before his death, were the words that made me weep. Someone is poisoning me. I think it's Angela. She has access to heart medications through her job, and my symptoms match digitalis toxicity. If something happens to me, Marcy needs to know the truth. I've hidden evidence in the safe. Protect her. Frank had died trying to warn me. I found the evidence he'd mentioned: hair samples sealed in envelopes, copies of Angela's work schedules that corresponded with his worst symptom days, and photographs he'd secretly taken of Angela adding something to his morning coffee. My husband had been conducting his own investigation while his daughter-in-law slowly murdered him. That evening, Angela increased my dosage of sleeping pills, but I only pretended to drink the tea. As she and Derek made final preparations for Christmas dinner, I called Helen Patterson. "Helen, I need your help," I whispered into the phone. "Can you come over? I have something incredible to show you." Helen arrived within minutes, and I played her the recorded confession. Her face went white as she listened to Angela admitting Frank's murder and planning Derek's death. "Marcy, this is evidence of multiple felonies," Helen said, her professional training taking over. "We need to involve law enforcement immediately." "Not yet," I replied. "Tomorrow I want everyone to see exactly who Derek and Angela really are. I want those 22 dinner guests to witness their complete exposure." Helen studied my face carefully. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to give them exactly the Christmas dinner performance they've been expecting," I said. "But the script is going to be very different from what they imagined." That night I lay in bed listening to Angela and Derek celebrate in the next room. They thought they were 12 hours away from total victory. They had no idea they were 12 hours away from complete destruction. I woke up Christmas morning with absolute clarity for the first time in 18 months. The crying, confused victim they'd been manipulating was gone, replaced by a woman who'd inherited 43 years of Frank's military strategic thinking. My first call was to James Buchanan. James, I need you to bring specific documents to Christmas dinner today. Frank's real will, the power of attorney papers Derek tried to file, and anything you have on Dr. Samuel Hayes. Marcy, are you planning something dramatic? James asked, worry evident in his voice. I'm planning to serve justice with the Christmas turkey, I replied. Next, I contacted Helen Patterson. Helen, I need you to document everything that happens today. Use your investigative skills and bring your camera. Also, can you contact any law enforcement friends who might be willing to make a house call this afternoon? Consider it done, Helen said. I've already reached out to Detective Sarah Mills from Portland Police. She's very interested in elder abuse cases. While Derek and Angela slept late recovering from their celebration, I made a series of calls that would change everything. I contacted Tommy Rodriguez and asked him to bring documentation of Derek's business fraud to dinner. I called 3 of Derek's clients who'd been asking about their stolen deposits. Most importantly, I reached out to Vincent Castellano's office. Mr. Castellano, this is Marcy Patterson. I understand my son Derek owes you $50,000. Perhaps we should discuss repayment terms in person today. By 10:30 that morning, I'd assembled an army of people who had reasons to confront Derek and Angela, but they didn't know they were coming to a reckoning. Angela emerged from her room in a red silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. She'd chosen the color deliberately. Red for confidence, red for victory. She had no idea it would be the perfect color for humiliation. Merry Christmas, Marcy. Angela chirped, her performance of devoted daughter-in-law flawless as always. Are you excited about signing those papers today? Derek's so proud that you're finally ready to simplify your life. I smiled weakly, playing my role. I'm still a little confused about everything, dear. Maybe you could explain it again during dinner. Derek appeared in his best suit, the same one he'd worn to Frank's funeral. His cologne couldn't mask the scent of desperation that clung to him like smoke. He'd been checking his phone constantly, probably coordinating with Dr. Hayes about my post-dinner commitment. Mom, today's going to be perfect. Derek said, his arm around my shoulders, feeling like a python's embrace. After dinner, when everyone sees how much we care about you, signing those papers will feel natural, like the right thing to do. The guests began arriving at noon. 22 people, just as Angela had planned, but several faces she wasn't expecting. Tommy Rodriguez brought his wife Maria, who'd always liked me. Detective Sarah Mills arrived in civilian clothes, introduced by Helen as her friend from book club. James Buchanan came with a briefcase full of legal documents. And at exactly 12:30, Vincent Castellano knocked on my front door. He was a compact man in an expensive overcoat, flanked by 2 associates who looked like they solved problems with their fists. Derek's face went chalk white when he saw them. Mr. Patterson, Castellano said pleasantly, your mother invited me to discuss your debt. $50,000 is a substantial amount to owe during the holidays. Derek stammered something about having the money soon, but Castellano's eyes were already scanning my house, calculating its value. Beautiful property, Castellano observed. This would definitely cover what you owe with interest. Angela tried to charm him, but Castellano wasn't interested in her performance. He was interested in assets, and I was the only person in the room who actually owned any. As dinner progressed, I watched Derek and Angela growing increasingly nervous. Their carefully planned timeline was being disrupted by unexpected guests and conversations they couldn't control. Tommy Rodriguez struck up a conversation with several neighbors about Derek's unfinished construction projects. The Hendersons paid him $8,000 for a deck that was never started. Tommy mentioned loudly enough for multiple tables to hear. Detective Mills, still playing the role of Helen's book club friend, asked innocent questions about family finances that made Angela squirm. It's so wonderful when families help each other out. Marcy, Derek mentioned you've been supporting his business. That must be expensive. James Buchanan positioned himself strategically near the dining room entrance, his briefcase within easy reach. Every few minutes he checked his watch like a man waiting for a specific moment. At 2:15, Angela couldn't wait any longer. She stood up, tapping her wine glass for attention. "Everyone, Derek and I have a special announcement." Angela began, her voice carrying forced cheerfulness. "We've been taking care of Marcy for over a year now, and we think it's time she enjoyed the security of having her finances managed professionally." Murmurs rippled through the room. Several guests looked uncomfortable, sensing something wrong, but unable to identify it. Derek stood beside his wife, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out the power of attorney documents. "Mom, we've talked about this. These papers will protect you and make everything easier. All you have to do is sign." I looked around the table at 22 faces, some concerned, others curious, all waiting for my response. Vincent Castellano watched with particular interest, probably calculating how quickly he could collect Derek's debt once I signed away my assets. "I'm still confused," I said weakly, playing my role perfectly. "Could you explain exactly what these papers mean?" Derek's patience snapped like a dry branch. All his months of careful manipulation dissolved into raw desperation. Mom, you're being ridiculous," he shouted, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You can't manage your own life anymore. You're forgetting everything, making mistakes with money, and frankly, you're becoming a burden." Angela joined in, her mask of sweetness falling away completely. "Marcy, we've been supporting you for over a year. If you can't appreciate what we're doing, maybe you should find somewhere else to live. Pay the rent or disappear." Derek slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. "That's right. Pay the rent or get out. We're done taking care of someone who can't even remember where she put her own medications." Angela's voice rose to a shriek. "Let's see how you survive without us. You're a confused old woman who can't function alone." The room fell absolutely silent. 22 guests stared in shock at the verbal assault they'd just witnessed. Children stopped eating, adults put down their forks, and the only sound was the ticking of Frank's grandfather clock. I stood up slowly, looking around the room at every face. When my eyes met Derek's, I saw him expecting victory. When I looked at Angela, she was already reaching for her phone to record my breakdown. But instead of crying or begging, I smiled. "Derek," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "would you like to explain to our guests why you murdered your father?" Derek's face went white as winter snow. Angela's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, and 22 witnesses leaned forward to hear what came next. The trap had been set for months, but Derek and Angela were the ones who just walked into it. The silence that followed my questions stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Angela's face cycled through confusion, fear, and desperate calculation. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Derek finally managed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Dad had a heart attack. You know that." I walked to the dining room sideboard where I'd placed a small digital recorder earlier that morning. 22 guests watched my every movement as I held up the device. "Would you like to hear your confession, Derek? Or shall I start with Angela's admission that she poisoned Frank with digitalis from the foxglove plants in our backyard?" I pressed play. Angela's recorded voice filled the room with crystal clarity. "The digitalis worked perfectly on Frank, and the sleeping pills have kept her confused enough to sign whatever we put in front of her." Gasps erupted around the table. Mrs. Henderson from next door covered her mouth with her napkin. Vincent Castellano leaned forward with sharp interest, probably recalculating whether Derek would live long enough to pay his debts. Derek lurched to his feet, knocking over his chair. That's not real. She's making this up. Mom's been confused and paranoid for months. I pressed play again. This time Derek's own voice emerged. Mom actually thinks we care about her. After Christmas dinner, she'll be committed and we'll be rich. Oh my God, whispered Maria Rodriguez. Several guests reached for their phones, but Helen Patterson was already photographing everything with professional precision. Angela finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate screech. Those recordings are fake. Marcy's been having episodes. We have medical documentation of her mental decline. You mean the forged psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Samuel Hayes? I asked pleasantly. The doctor who lost his medical license in California for insurance fraud. James Buchanan chose that moment to rise from his seat, briefcase in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm James Buchanan, the Patterson family attorney. I have Frank's actual will here, along with documentation proving that every medical claim about Marcy's competency is fraudulent. He opened his briefcase with theatrical precision, spreading documents across my dining table like evidence in a courtroom. Frank Patterson left everything to his wife, Marcy. Derek inherits nothing except his father's tools and truck. Furthermore, Derek has been forging Marcy's signature on loan applications, using this house as collateral for debts she never authorized. Tommy Rodriguez stood up, his face flushed with anger. Derek's been stealing from our business accounts too. He owes clients over $60,000 for work he never completed. Vincent Castellano's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Interesting. Derek told me his mother would cover his $50,000 debt. But if she never agreed to that? Derek was backing toward the kitchen, his eyes darting between exits like a cornered animal. This is insane. You're all ganging up on me. Mom, tell them you've been confused lately. Instead, I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a small evidence bag containing white powder residue. This is what Angela's been putting in my tea every night for months. Crushed sleeping pills to make me appear confused while she filmed me as evidence of mental decline. Detective Sarah Mills finally revealed herself, standing and displaying her badge. I'm Detective Mills with Portland Police. Mrs. Patterson contacted us about elder abuse, financial fraud, and suspected murder. Angela Rodriguez, Derek Patterson, you're both under arrest. Angela made a run for it, her high heels clicking frantically across my hardwood floors. But Helen Patterson, drawing on 30 years of investigative experience, calmly extended her foot. Angela went down hard, her red dress spreading around her like spilled blood. You can't arrest us, Angela screamed from the floor. She's crazy. We have medical proof. Detective Mills was already calling for backup, speaking rapidly into her radio. I need additional units for a double homicide confession and elder abuse case. Suspects in custody. Derek pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Dr. Hayes, we need those commitment papers right now. My mother's having a complete psychotic break. I smiled as I pulled Frank's secret evidence from behind his military photo. Derek, Dr. Hayes won't be taking your call. He was arrested this morning on federal charges for medical fraud across 3 states. Apparently, when you're practicing without a license, creating fake psychiatric evaluations constitutes multiple felonies. The room erupted in chaos. Vincent Castellano was photographing everything, probably as insurance for his own legal protection. Tommy Rodriguez was calling clients to report that Derek would be arrested for theft. The twins Madison and Paige were crying upstairs, finally understanding that their parents were criminals. Angela tried one final desperate play. Samuel and I are in love. Derek was blackmailing me. I only helped him because he threatened to hurt me. I pressed play on the recorder again, letting her own words convict her. I'm so tired of pretending to be the devoted daughter-in-law. After New Year, Derek will be rich and single. Interesting, Detective Mills observed. That sounds like conspiracy to commit murder, not self-defense. Derek collapsed into a chair, his suit wrinkled and sweat-stained. Angela, you said this would be easy. You said Mom would just sign the papers and we'd be rich. You're both idiots, Angela snarled, her mask of sweetness completely shattered. Samuel and I have been planning this for 2 years. You were just a useful fool, Derek, like your pathetic father. The backup officers arrived as Angela was confessing to manipulating Derek. As they read both suspects their rights, I felt an enormous weight lifting from my shoulders. Frank's murder would finally see justice. Vincent Castellano approached me as his associates escorted Derek outside. Mrs. Patterson, I respect what you've done here today. Your son's debt is his responsibility, not yours. Consider the matter closed. He paused at the door. Magnificent chess game, lady. You played it perfectly. As the police cars pulled away with Derek and Angela in custody, I looked around my dining room at the remaining guests. 22 people had arrived expecting a Christmas dinner. Instead, they'd witnessed the complete destruction of a murder conspiracy. Helen Patterson began clearing dishes with the efficiency of someone who'd seen enough crime scenes to know that life goes on. Marcy, what happens to the twins? I looked upstairs toward Madison and Paige's muffled crying. They're innocent victims in this mess. They'll stay with me until we sort out a permanent solution. Those girls deserve a chance at a normal life. James Buchanan was already organizing legal documents. Marcy, with Derek's criminal charges, his parental rights will likely be terminated. If you want to pursue custody of the twins, I can begin the paperwork immediately. As the last guest left that evening, I sat alone in my kitchen with a cup of tea that no one had drugged. For the first time in 18 months, I felt completely safe in my own home. Frank's photograph smiled down at me from the mantelpiece, and I whispered to him, "Justice served my love, just like you would have wanted." The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the end of Christmas Day and the beginning of Derek and Angela's reckoning. But for me, it was the start of something much more important. It was the first day of the rest of my life. 6 months later, I sat in a Portland courtroom watching Derek and Angela receive their sentences. The media had dubbed it the Christmas murder plot, and reporters packed every available seat. The twins Madison and Paige sat beside me, their hands gripping mine as the judge delivered justice. Derek Patterson. Judge Catherine Morrison announced, "You are sentenced to 15 years in Oregon State Penitentiary for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, financial fraud, and embezzlement. The court finds your actions particularly heinous, given that the victim was your own mother." Derek slumped in his orange jumpsuit, 38 years old, and finally facing the consequences of his greed. His construction business had been liquidated to pay back defrauded clients, but the money wasn't enough. 17 families would never recover their stolen deposits. Angela Rodriguez. The judge continued, "You are sentenced to 25 years for the first-degree murder of Frank Patterson, conspiracy to commit additional murders, and elder abuse. The court notes that your medical training makes your crimes especially egregious." Angela's face remained stone cold as bailiffs led her away in chains. She'd maintained her innocence throughout the trial, claiming Derek had forced her participation. But the jury had heard her recorded confessions and seen Frank's medical evidence. Her affair with Dr. Samuel Hayes had been exposed, revealing a romantic conspiracy that had cost my husband his life. Dr. Hayes himself had received a federal sentence of 12 years for medical fraud insurance schemes and conspiracy to commit murder across 4 states. The FBI had discovered he'd been creating fake psychiatric evaluations for similar inheritance scams throughout the Pacific Northwest. Tommy Rodriguez testified against Derek in exchange for immunity. His construction business was now thriving under honest management, and he'd hired 3 former clients who'd lost money to Derek's schemes. Mrs. Patterson. Judge Morrison addressed me directly. The court commends your courage in exposing this conspiracy. Your evidence gathering was instrumental in achieving justice for your husband's murder. Outside the courthouse, Helen Patterson linked her arm through mine as reporters shouted questions. At 59, Helen had become my closest friend and business partner. Together, we'd established the Frank Patterson Foundation for Elder Protection, using money from Derek's forfeited assets. How does it feel to see justice served? A television reporter called out. It feels like Frank can finally rest in peace, I replied. But the real victory is protecting other families from similar predators. The twins and I drove home to our new life. 6 months earlier, I'd sold the Victorian house where so much pain had occurred. The memories of Frank's murder and Derek's betrayal were too embedded in those walls for healing to happen there. Instead, we'd moved to Frank's lake cabin in the Cascade Mountains, 2 hours east of Portland. The 3-bedroom log home sat on 15 acres of pristine wilderness with a private dock extending into crystal clear water. Madison and Paige had their own rooms overlooking the lake, and they'd transformed from traumatized children into confident young women. Grandma Marcy, Madison said as we unpacked groceries that evening, "Are you sure you want us to keep living here permanently? We don't want to be a burden." I stopped arranging flowers Frank had loved to grow. "Girls, you are not a burden. You are the greatest blessing that came from all this pain. This is your home for as long as you want it." Paige, always the more serious twin, looked up from her homework. "Our parents did terrible things, but you saved us anyway. Why?" "Because you're not responsible for their choices," I replied. "You deserve love, stability, and the chance to become whoever you want to be." The girls had been attending Mountain View Academy, a small private school 30 minutes from the cabin. Their grades had improved dramatically once they escaped the chaos of their parents' criminal lifestyle. Madison wanted to study veterinary medicine, while Paige dreamed of becoming a lawyer like James Buchanan. "We want to take your last name legally," Madison announced during dinner that night. "We don't want to be Rodriguez anymore. We want to be Patterson girls." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at these brave children who'd survived their parents' betrayal and chosen love over bitterness. "I would be honored to make that legal. You've been Patterson girls in my heart since the day this all began." Helen called that evening with updates about the foundation. "Marcy, we've received 43 applications for assistance this month. Elder abuse is more common than people realize." The Frank Patterson Foundation had grown beyond my expectations. Using funds from the sale of the Portland house and Derek's forfeited construction assets, we provided legal aid counseling and financial support for seniors victimized by family members. Helen managed the investigative aspects while I handled victim support. "There's a case in Salem that reminds me of yours," Helen continued. "A daughter drugging her mother to steal Social Security benefits. Should I drive down tomorrow?" "Absolutely. And Helen, take Maria Rodriguez with you. Her experience as a nurse helps victims understand medical abuse tactics." Maria Rodriguez had divorced Tommy after learning he'd known about Derek's theft, but hadn't reported it initially. Now she worked full-time for our foundation using her medical background to identify signs of drugging and physical abuse. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. Vincent Castellano knocked on my cabin door wearing a business suit and carrying flowers. "Mrs. Patterson, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to thank you personally." I invited him in for coffee, curious about his purpose. The loan shark who'd threatened Derek had become an unlikely ally during the investigation. "Your son's case led police to a much larger investigation," Castellano explained. "They discovered connections between Dr. Hayes and organized medical fraud schemes. Several people I'd been forced to work with were arrested. You've helped clean up business I never wanted to be part of." He handed me a check for $50,000. Derek's debt with interest. Donate it to your foundation. Consider it payment for services rendered to law enforcement. After he left, I sat on my deck watching the twins fish from our dock. Madison was teaching Paige to cast properly their laughter, carrying across the water like music. These girls had lost criminal parents, but gained something infinitely more valuable, the chance for honest lives filled with love. That evening brought the most satisfying moment of all. A thick envelope arrived from Oregon State Penitentiary with Derek's return address. Inside were 10 pages of handwritten desperation, begging for forgiveness and financial help. Mom, I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your son. The other inmates treat me terribly when they find out what I did to you. Please put money in my commissary account. Please visit me. Please don't abandon me like I abandoned you. I walked to the fireplace and fed Derek's letter to the flames, watching his words turn to ash. Some relationships are too poisoned for redemption, and accepting that truth was part of my healing. A similar letter from Angela had arrived the week before, claiming she'd been manipulated and asking for legal help with her appeal. That letter had also met the fireplace. The twins watched Derek's letter burn without comment. They'd chosen to view his imprisonment as protection rather than punishment. Smart girls. James Buchanan called the next morning with final legal news. Marcy Derek's parental rights have been officially terminated. The twins' adoption by you is complete. Congratulations, you're officially a mother again at 66. I hung up the phone and walked onto my deck, breathing mountain air that tasted like freedom. Frank's military flag flew from a pole beside our dock, and I could almost feel his approval in the morning breeze. The grandfather clock we'd moved from the Portland house chimed 10 times, marking another hour in our new life. But unlike the ominous countdowns of Derek's conspiracy, these chimes marked moments of peace. Vincent Castellano had been right. It had been a magnificent chess game. But the real victory wasn't destroying Derek and Angela. The real victory was saving Madison and Paige from inheriting their parents' corruption. As I watched my granddaughters plan their futures over breakfast, I realized Frank would have been proud of the family we'd become. Not the family we'd started with, but the family we'd chosen to create from love instead of blood. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let evil people destroy your capacity for love. 1 year after that terrible Christmas dinner, I hosted a very different kind of holiday celebration. 22 guests filled my lake cabin, but these were survivors rather than spectators. They were women and men who'd escaped financial abuse, medical manipulation, and family betrayal. They were the people the Frank Patterson Foundation had helped rebuild their lives. Dorothy Hutchinson, 74, sat near my fireplace, telling Madison about surviving her nephew's attempt to have her declared incompetent. I lost my house, but I gained my self-respect, Dorothy said. Marcy taught me that fighting back isn't mean it's necessary. William Chen, 68, shared his story with Paige about exposing his daughter's stolen pension scheme. My wife died thinking I'd abandoned her in the nursing home. I couldn't prove my daughter was stealing my payments until Marcy's foundation provided investigators. Helen Patterson raised her wine glass for a toast to Frank Patterson, who taught us that evidence gathering is the foundation of justice, and to Marcy, who proved that victims can become warriors. The twins, now 14 and thriving, moved between guests like young hostesses. Madison had started a school project documenting elder abuse cases, while Paige volunteered at the foundation's legal clinic. They'd inherited trauma, but chosen to transform it into purpose. Grandma Marcy, Paige said during dinner preparations, Mrs. Chen asked if Derek ever tried to contact us. Should I tell her about the letters? Derek wrote monthly from prison letters that grew increasingly desperate as his commissary account remained empty and visiting logs stayed blank. Angela had stopped writing after her appeal was denied. Neither parent would see freedom until the twins were adults, with lives too full for bitterness. "You can tell her whatever feels comfortable," I replied. "Your story belongs to you now." James Buchanan arrived fashionably late, carrying legal documents and wine from Frank's favorite vineyard. At 74, James had become the foundation's general counsel, donating his services to ensure other families received protection he'd failed to provide Frank. "Marcy, I have wonderful news," James announced. The Oregon legislature passed the Frank Patterson Elder Protection Act. It requires medical second opinions for psychiatric competency evaluations and mandatory reporting for financial institutions when elderly clients show signs of coercion. Applause filled my dining room. Frank's death had prevented countless others from suffering similar fates. Maria Rodriguez emerged from the kitchen carrying her famous tamales. After divorcing Tommy, she'd found purpose helping abuse victims understand medical manipulation tactics. Her nursing expertise had exposed 3 doctors who'd been creating false dementia diagnoses for inheritance scams. "I have news too," Maria announced. "The foundation received a $100,000 grant from the Department of Justice. We can expand services to rural communities where elder abuse often goes undetected." Detective Sarah Mills, now a close friend, shared updates about similar cases throughout Oregon. Angela and Derek's convictions opened floodgates. Families are coming forward about suspicious deaths and financial manipulation they'd previously accepted as normal aging. As evening approached, guests gathered around my fireplace, sharing stories of healing and hope. These weren't bitter people seeking revenge. They were survivors who'd chosen growth over grievance. Tommy Rodriguez arrived with his new wife, Elena, a social worker who specialized in family trauma. Tommy had spent 2 years making amends for his silence about Derek's theft, personally repaying every cheated client before starting his honest construction company. "Mrs. Patterson," Tommy said, "Elena and I want you to know how much your forgiveness meant. Not everyone would have given me a second chance after I stayed quiet about Derek's stealing." "People make mistakes when they're afraid," I replied. "The measure of character is what we do after we recognize our errors." Vincent Castellano's annual Christmas card sat on my mantle, along with updates about his legitimate financial consulting business. The former loan shark had reinvented himself as an advocate for small business owners, using his understanding of desperation to prevent people from making dangerous choices. As guests departed into the snowy mountain night, I stood on my deck breathing air that smelled like pine needles and possibility. The twins were inside wrapping gifts for the children's shelter we supported, their laughter floating through windows like a promise that goodness could emerge from the darkest circumstances. Helen joined me on the deck, her breath forming clouds in the December cold. "Do you ever regret not accepting Derek's apologies? Some people think forgiveness is always the higher path." I considered her question while watching stars reflect on the lake's surface. "Forgiveness doesn't require relationship restoration. I've forgiven Derek and Angela in the sense that I don't carry hatred, but I won't pretend their abuse was acceptable or enable future harm by maintaining contact." "What about the twins? Don't you worry they'll resent your decision?" "They understand that love sometimes means protecting people from toxic relationships, even family ones. The healthiest gift I can give them is demonstrating that self-respect isn't selfish." A year earlier, I'd been a victim being slowly destroyed by people who claimed to love me. Now I was a woman who'd learned that survival isn't enough. You have to decide what you're surviving for. Frank's photograph smiled at me from my living room as the twins said goodnight. Madison kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you for saving us, Grandma Marcy." Paige added, "Thank you for showing us that fighting back doesn't make you mean." As I prepared for bed in my peaceful mountain home, I reflected on the journey from that horrible Christmas dinner to this moment of contentment. Derek and Angela had taught me an invaluable lesson. When people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. Frank had spent his final months trying to protect me from Angela's poison. His evidence had ultimately delivered justice, but more importantly, it had freed me from the guilt of abandoning family. Some family members abandon you first through their choices. Recognizing that truth isn't cruelty, it's wisdom. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking another year of freedom from manipulation and abuse. But unlike the ominous countdowns of Derek's conspiracy, this midnight felt like a beginning rather than an ending. I'd learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so fulfilling that their absence improves it. Derek and Angela had tried to steal my home, my money, and my dignity. Instead, they'd inadvertently given me something far more valuable, the absolute certainty that I deserved better. Sometimes the greatest gift toxic people can give you is forcing you to discover your own strength. Now, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members or close friends took advantage of your kindness? How did you find the strength to set boundaries and protect yourself? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience might inspire someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about people who found the courage to fight back against those who tried to destroy them. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to Marcy's journey from victim to victor. Remember, you have more strength inside you than you realize, and you deserve to be treated with respect and love. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.